All right. Good. Good afternoon, AP World History students. The I, I know you really wanted to go over the FRQs, okay, the writing sections of the AP exam from the other day, and we can't talk about them until they get released, but they just got released a couple minutes ago. Really, I looked through them pretty quickly, and I can kind of see why you guys were in a pretty good mood, it seems like, because it looks like it was a lot of stuff that we covered pretty extensively in the classroom. I am going to go through a couple of the writing things, and I'll give you my initial thoughts on it, and then you can decide, how you think you did based on that. Of course, we don't know, but this is just my opinion, so we'll We'll go first to SAQ number 1. Here's what it said. Asia experienced a temporary gain from the discovery of America, but Africa suffered. Africa had all the silver and gold Europe needed, and this destroyed the African gold markets and the dependent trade networks. Cities such as Timbuktu and the Songhai Empire, of which it was a part, crumbled as merchants abandoned the ancient trade routes. To replace the Mediterranean trade of cloth, beads, leather, and metals upon which the Africans had become dependent, the Africans now had only one commodity that the Europeans wanted, which was slaves. For centuries, African merchants had sold a small but steady number of slaves to the Middle East, but with the decline of their traditional European trade and with the opening of America, the slave trade became a boom. The Africans thus became victims of the discovery of America as surely as did the American Indians. Okay. Part A. Identify one claim the author makes in the first paragraph about the effect of the discovery of the Americas on Africa. For these, you just have to identify literally something the author said. Okay, so there's a lot of things you could say, like Africa. If you said something like Africa suffered because of the discovery of the Americas, okay, anything like that, you would get credit. If you said something like the African economy became dependent on the slave trade, you would get credit. If you said that Africans suffered similarly to the American Indians, you would get credit. Okay, all those any one of those things or those kinds of things, you're just identifying something that the author is claiming. B. Describe one economic change in the Americas that occurred as a result of the developments discussed in the second paragraph, which is the increase of slave trade. So if you said, the Americas, they started to use slave labor in the Americas, anything relating to that, okay, that would definitely get credit. That's really the biggest thing. Let me think here. The biggest thing is there was a influx of slave labor into the Americas that was used to harvest crops and work and all those kinds of things. Letter C. Explain one reason why American Indians became victims of the discovery of America, as suggested by the author in the last sentence of the passage. So you would say that they died from smallpox. I bet a lot of you put that. A lot of you probably put that they were displaced from their land, or they were conquered by the Spanish and the Portuguese and the British. They were, their civilizations were strongly, affected badly by the influx of Europeans. But I would say then the main ones would be they suffered from disease, and then also their civilizations were damaged or destroyed. All right, that's SAQ number 1. SAQ 2. History teaches us that those who forget to think about themselves will be forgotten by others. It is this principle that prompts me to publish a women's newspaper. My sisters, join me so that we shall not be left behind while everyone else around us is pushing forward. We demand the right to cultivate our human potential and the right to act independently in the state. We want to spread the great ideas of liberty and humanity through every avenue open to us. To the wider world, we want to spread these ideas through the press. Within the narrower world of our families, we want to spread these ideas through example, instruction, and child rearing. We want to earn our liberty and humanity not by striving individually, each one for herself, but rather by looking after those who languish, forgotten and neglected in poverty, misery, ignorance, each for all. Okay, this is Louise Otto Peters, a German writer, first issue of the women's newspaper, the first women's newspaper published in Germany, 1849. The newspaper was banned by the government in Saxony, Germany. I really hope all of you looked at this and saw that year, 1849. I know that you must have saw that, and your eyes just lit right up. Because we didn't talk about 1849 at all, but we did talk about 1848 extensively, and I made a big deal about it a bunch of times in the past few weeks, and I feel like you guys are pretty locked in on that. And that's a key thing to know for this particular SAQ. All right, so identify one likely audience for the claims that the author makes in the passage. She is talking about, banding together, getting women's rights, and trying to work together with other people who are downtrodden, okay, or having a hard time. So one likely audience would be people who are like feminists, who are like striving for women's rights. And then the other audience may be communists. Okay, so in 1848, there was the Seneca Falls Convention, which is the big women's rights convention. And then there was also the publishing of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, and both of those in 1848. Those two things, those audiences would be the main ones I would focus on in this time period. The other thing you could talk about potentially is also during this time was the Industrial Revolution. And so you had a lot of people in cities that were struggling, who are like the lower class workers, and they were looking for, some help because they were like working in factories and their lives weren't very good. All right, part B, describe one historical context during the 19th century that explains the increased poverty and misery referred to in the fourth paragraph. All right, I would go with Industrial Revolution. Workers are not doing good. They're having a really hard time. And so that led to misery for those lower class people. And this woman is reaching out to those people. That's my big answer to that one. I'm sure there's other things you could put, but that would be my number one thing. Part C, explain how one ideology or set of ideas likely influence the author's claims in the passage. I would go with, there's two isms here. I would say feminism or communism. One of the two of those is going to be, those are ideologies, ways of thinking. That is going to get you credit. Feminism or communism. And you have to explain it. So you're saying, well, she is influenced by ideas that women should have equal rights. Or if with communism, she's influenced by the idea that, the workers should band together and have a more equal society. Let's go to 3 and 4. Number 3, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what you guys picked more of here. I feel like we covered both of these kind of equally. 3A, identify one technological or military factor that contributed to the expansion of Muslim empires such as the Ottoman, Safavid, or Mughal empires during the period 1300 to 1600. Gunpowder. Gunpowder every time. It does say or, so I mean, if you didn't put gunpowder, you may have put like the Janissaries were a military factor for the Ottomans, but those would be the key. Gunpowder's the answer they're looking for there. B, Explain one way the Muslim rulers during the period circa 1300 to 1600 used economic policies to generate revenue for their states or empires. Um, I so Muslim rulers, that's all three of those empires I just named. You have economic policies such as the Zamindars in the Mughal Empire. Okay, you have Ottoman tax farming. Uh, you could say the Devshirme system in the Ottoman Empire would probably work too, because that's kind of like a tax. But those are all taxes, things that the governments did. So the Zamindars in the Mughal Empire, Devshirme system in Ottoman Empire, and then the Ottoman tax farming as well would be the kind of the key things. Part C, explain one reason why Muslim rulers during the period circa 1300 to 1600 adopted tolerant policies towards religious or ethnic minorities in their states or empires. They lived in places and they ruled over people of different religions than them. Okay, so in the Mughal Empire, they were a Muslim controlled government, but they ruled over many, many Hindus. And so there is a chance of having religious, conflict. If you mention Akbar in there and him being religiously tolerant, you're gonna for sure get the point there. You don't have to, but like if you were to talk about that, you'd be feeling pretty good. The Ottomans ruled over many Christians as they expanded their empire, so that was another reason to adopt policies of religious tolerance in order to, maintain peace within their empires. Number 4, identify one factor that contributed to the outbreak of revolutions in the period circa 1750 to 1900. Okay, so let's zero in on the Atlantic revolutions, which we covered extensively. Identify one factor, literally one. Unfair taxation, slavery in Haiti, governments not responding to the needs of people, food shortages. Those are like the big ones. If you said the American Revolution inspiring the French Revolution, you would get credit for that. I guess if you guys remember back, one of my big lectures with drawing all over the board was basically all about this question. B, explain one way revolutionary movements use ideologies in their attempts to change societies during the period circa 1750 to 1900. So we're gonna hopefully maybe be thinking about like Enlightenment ideals and also nationalism and the idea that people deserve representation in governments, that they deserve to have control over how they are governed, and that people within those within countries should have if they have they shouldn't be ruled by like an empire. They should have their own states. That's nationalism. Those are the big ones. Also, like if we're thinking about Haiti, you could be thinking about like abolitionism or like natural rights for people, in the idea that like slavery is bad and that people shouldn't be enslaved. Part C, explain one way in which revolutionary movements were challenged as they attempted to change societies during the period circa 1750 to 1900. How are they challenged? Well, in Haiti, the French fought back against them, against the slaves that were, fighting. In America, the British fought back against the American colonists. In France, the royals, the monarchy fought back against the people. That didn't work very well, but they did. And then actually a bunch of other European countries started fighting against France. In the Latin American revolutions, the Spanish fought back against the Latin American revolutionaries. So hopefully anything regarding that with basically the mother country or the powerful country fighting back against the revolutionaries. Okay. SAQs. I mean, those aren't easy. I feel like they're not easy by any means, but at the same time, like, man, we covered a lot of that. I mean, we covered all of it, to be honest. And I feel like we even covered a significant amount of it in review over the past few weeks. Let's skip the DVQ for a second and go to the LEQs. All right. Number 2. I think, well, first off, I'm pretty sure, I would imagine a lot of you picked number 4 for this, but I'm not sure. Number 2, in the period circa 1200 to 1450, Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism included ideas about social structures, gender roles, and political authority that influenced societies across Asia. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which one or more of these belief systems shaped societies and or political systems in Asia during this period. I would say if you guys chose this one, most of you, if you chose this, would have chosen Confucianism and talked about it in China, and you would have talked about the civil service exam and filial piety dictating how governments were ran in China. That would be my guess for that one, and you would get good credit if you did that. Number 3, in the period circa 1450 to 1750, economic, political, and religious rivalries led many imperial states around the world to expand their territories and influence. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which economic rivalries were the primary motivation for the expansion of European empires during this time period. Okay, so were economic rivalries the main reason for the government's expanding, or was it something else? Okay, so were the Spanish trying to make a lot of money in the New World, or were they motivated by something else, like spreading Christianity? Same thing if we're looking, we can be talking about the Portuguese or the French also, and British, also spreading out into the New World to get rich and looking for trade and those kinds of things. You could be mentioning any one of those kinds of ideas of trying to get rich. You could also have talked about battles between the Ottomans and the Safavids during this time period, which was, they had fought many wars over different territories and things like that. But I would guess if you chose this one, you probably talked about European empires like the Spanish, Portuguese, and British spreading out into the Americas to get rich or to spread Christianity. That's my guess. Number 4, during the 20th century, medical and scientific discoveries affected life expectancies, access to resources, and social and economic structures, which reshaped individuals' lives as well as entire societies. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which medical and scientific discoveries benefited individuals and or societies during this time period. Okay, I feel like we talked about this a lot because we did an SAQ on it like a few weeks ago. So what are some medical and scientific discoveries that benefited individuals during the 20th century? We have new advancements in medicine, antibiotics, new cancer treatments, new medical technology, anything. There's a bajillion things that helped with that. Sanitation methods, so many different things. You could also talk about birth control, which is a technology that we highlighted several times from the AP World History curriculum that would definitely fit for this as well. Then I'm guessing a fair amount of you had a counter argument that said something to the effect of, even though the scientific discoveries made people's lives last longer, there were some drawbacks to this. What were the drawbacks? Well, societies had more people to feed. They had more people to feed, and to support with their social welfare systems. And so that strained the economies of developed nations during the 20th century. That's the biggest one. Also, as people live longer, they have different kinds of diseases that affect people in old age that honestly didn't really happen before people were living as long as they are today. Um, so, so yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. I would imagine a lot of you chose four, and then probably a lot of you chose three, and maybe not so many chose two. But I think you're prepared for either one of those. Let's look at the DBQ. Where are we at here? Okay, the prompt. Evaluate the extent to which new transportation and/or communication technologies affected African societies during the period, circa 1850 to 1960. I mean, what are the odds that the DBQ has to deal with technology, which we probably focused on more than, like, there very few classes will have focused on technology as much as we did throughout the course of the year. That's going like for across the entire country. We just talked a lot about technology the whole time. I also feel like over the past several weeks, we talked a lot about Africa. And so when you saw this, I bet you were pretty pumped. I hope you were. Thinking about the prompt without even looking at the documents yet, we're thinking this shows how new transportation and communication technologies, I would say, probably going positive or negative here. I don't know. I haven't even looked at the documents yet. But, this shows how new transportation technologies positively affected African societies because. Or this shows how new transportation and communication technologies negatively affected African societies because. Or you could just say that they affected or didn't affect. All right. Thinking about context. Okay. Once again, I haven't even looked at the documents yet, just looking at the prompt. Africa, 1850 to 1960. What kinds of things can we talk about? Berlin Conference, 1885. The Belgian Congo from, well, basically the late 1800s through the early 1900s. You can talk about decolonization movements in the 1950s. Those are the kind of big things for like Africa. Also maybe some leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Pan-Africanism, if you were getting pretty deep in there. And then if we're thinking about technologies, we're thinking about steam engine, telegraph lines. Those are transportation. Oh, railroads would be big. Those are all things that you potentially could have put in there for context. All right, why not just go document by document and see what this has to say? I have not looked at these yet. Document 1. By Bure and other leaders of the Temne people in Sierra Leone in West Africa, letter to the British colonial authorities of Sierra Leone, 1896. So this is a African person writing to the British. We received a letter from the colonial governor sent to tell us that the British Queen now takes the whole of Temne country. We read the governor's letter, and we now know the law that the governor puts on us, namely that we are to pay a tax on our houses each year so the government can build roads and a rail line. But we must inform you that we are not able to pay a tax for our own houses because we have no power and no money to do so. So please tell the governor we beg him not to impose the tax and to consider the old agreement he made with our fathers. Where's this? There's a little footnote. The British colonial authorities attempted to impose a hut tax on each African household in Sierra Leone to raise money for transportation projects. Okay. All right. So how is this showing that new transportation is affecting African societies? This document shows how new transportation technologies are negatively affecting African societies because the British are imposing taxes on African people in order to pay for new railway lines in Africa. Okay. Um, that is pretty straightforward, I think. What about author's analysis? Uh, he is Sense by Bure mentions the fact that they had a previous agreement in the older generation had a previous agreement with the British. He's relying on the fact that he believes the British will uphold this agreement, and so he believes that they're going to abide by the previous roles or previous terms of the agreement. And then if I wanted to keep going, and say, history has shown that the Europeans in Africa often broke agreements like this, or something like that. There's, of course, with author's analysis, you could go in so many different directions. So I'm just giving you what's off the top of my head after just looking at this for the first time. Document 2. Source: William Douglas Mackenzie, Protestant minister in South Africa who later emigrated to the United States. Image from his illustrated book, South Africa, Its History, Heroes, and Wars, published in Chicago, 1899. The photograph shows 2 African employees of the Kimberley diamond mines in South Africa. The caption reads, "Going home from the mines, these 2 Bechuanas, members of the Setswana people of Southern Africa, have been working at Kimberley or Johannesburg and have received their pay in golden coin of the British realm. They're traveling on the road from 100 to 400 miles to their distant home. They carry a few trophies purchased in the great city, and reckon themselves as they approach their hometown among the heroes and wise men of the tribe." Okay, so how is this showing how transportation or communication technologies impacted African societies? Well, we are seeing that these people are able to travel over long distances on roads that have been built, and likely being built by the Europeans. And they are able to travel on these roads in order to work in the diamond mines. Now, these 2 guys, it looks like they made money, and they actually did okay. It seems like that's at least from the story that we're looking at here. So I would say, if we're looking at this, we could say, let's go back and look at the prompt. I don't have it memorized. This shows how new transportation technologies, you could say, positively impacted African people, because these 2 individuals were able to travel a far distance from their hometown and make money. That, once again, just thinking about like straightforward thing that I know would get credit, that would get credit. If I am thinking about author's analysis, this guy's a Protestant minister. And so he is likely trying to convert people to Christianity and shed light on the situation going on in Africa and what the people are doing there. So he's documenting this photo of these 2 individuals to try to shed more light on his work of converting people in Africa. Let's go to document 3. Exchange of telegrams between William Lowe, British colonial official in Gold Coast, that's present-day Ghana, and British colonial secretary Joseph Chamberlain in London in 1900. April 30th, 1900. Lowe to Chamberlain. Update on the fighting against the Ashanti. The Ashanti was an African state adjacent to the British Gold Coast colony, whose rulers fought 5 wars of resistance against the British colonial expansion during the 19th century. Ashanti warriors launched a serious attack on a telegraph clerk while he was repairing telegraph lines that had previously been severed by the Ashanti. Other telegraph clerks report Ashanti troops have effectively blockaded the main road to the city of Kumasi since April 25th. Government troops from Lagos and Nigeria were sent to Kumasi. We hope that they will succeed in reopening communications. May 1st, 1900. So 2 days later, Chamberlain to Lowe. In response to your telegram on April 30th, we will be sending 250 more troops from southern Nigeria to Kumasi to counter Ashanti attacks. I will send 50 additional frontier police from Sierra Leone to Ashanti territories for protection of British life and property. All right. So this shows how new communication technologies negatively affected African society because the British were able to use the telegraph to communicate very quickly and decide where to delegate troops in order to fight back against African resistance. And you can say that, so we got here, looking at the two people, two British colonial people, you could say that during this time period, the telegraph being used as a communication method was a new, technology that the Europeans and the British were able to utilize, and they had access to this while the African people generally did not have access to it, which gives these two British people a significant advantage. Document 4. Source: Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, a British shipping company that provided passenger and freight service from Great Britain to many parts of the world. An advertising brochure for travelers on P&O ships to Egypt in 1908. As we leave the ship at Alexandria and board the train to Cairo, we may observe simple farm and rural scenes, but also here and there the huge new cotton mills that remind us that Egypt is progressive and up to date. Cairo has changed greatly since 1882. Beginning in 1882, Great Britain effectively controlled Egypt without formally colonizing the country. It is inevitable, in a country so closely in touch with Western civilization, many traditional local shops have been replaced by storefronts with large windows displaying products of European industry. In the west end of Cairo, huge hotels and commercial buildings have replaced the former delightful residences of the elite. In the hotels, the vibrant social life of modern Cairo is in full swing, making the city attractive to many. Okay. This document shows how new transportation technologies like shipping, mostly shipping, right? It doesn't talk about railroads. The ability for steamships and shipping companies to go quickly back and forth between Britain and Europe, or Britain and Egypt. This shows how those new technologies help negatively affect African society because European economics and industry is replacing the African economic establishment, okay, and displacing the elite that previously had, a strong foothold there. You could talk about, talking about cotton mills. That was a thing that the British, if you talk about during this time period, the British replaced or forced their colonies in India and Egypt to replace like food farming with cash crop farming like cotton, which is one of the reasons why there are giant cotton mills there. The other thing is like, what is this? It's an advertisement for a shipping company. So this is going to show the positives of the influx of British involvement in Egypt and not talk about all the negatives of their local businesses and people being displaced. Document 5. British Parliamentary Commission appointed to investigate the spread of tuberculosis in South Africa. Report of its findings presented to the British Parliament in 1914. In those towns which were the first to be opened up by the railway, the disease of tuberculosis has prevailed the longest and to the greatest extent. The opening up of South Africa as a result of the development of diamond and gold mining has led to the creation of labor centers and the clustering of African and mixed race populations in towns and in separate workers' quarters, where the conditions of housing and general health have been bad in the extreme. For the first time, increasing numbers of Africans are crowding into urban centers in search of work that dire economic conditions and expanding needs are forcing them to undertake. With these changes have come changes in habits in clothing and in diet, the adoption of European vices, and the exposure of unhealthy conditions of labor in mines and elsewhere. It is evident that the rise of industry has produced exactly those conditions that can best account for the spread of tuberculosis in South Africa. Okay. This shows how new transportation technologies like the railroad has negatively affected Africa, because now that more people are gathered together in urban centers, diseases like tuberculosis are spreading and killing everyone. That's pretty straightforward. Something I would go for something along those lines. This is pretty not good. Doesn't say anything really positive happening. You could mention, during this time with the industrialization across the world, many people are moving from rural areas to urban centers, which is reflected by the developments that they're talking about in this document. Why else would they write this? It's a parliamentary commission, so that's like a government commission. The British Parliamentary Commission produced this document in order to let the government know what was going on with their colonial holdings, because they have economic interest in what happens there. Document 6. William Claridge and Hugh Clifford, British colonial officials employed in the colony of Gold Coast, present-day Ghana, A History of the Gold Coast and Ashanti. Book published in London, 1915. The completion of the railway from the port of Sekondi to Kumasi in 1903 has been followed by the construction of another line from the port of Accra to the cocoa-bearing districts, and these two lines have enormously facilitated trade. The first line has also been responsible for the establishment of numerous European trading firms in Kumasi, which has been become a great trading center. The abolition of the slave trade and the acquisition of most of the gold-bearing lands in the colony by the European entrepreneurs has caused the local people to seek work in timber, rubber, collecting, and agriculture, which the government has encouraged by holding agricultural shows and providing traveling instructors to assist farmers with expert advice. A submarine cable to England was connected in 1886. And the telegraphic communications between different parts of the country has been extended even to the northern districts. Okay. So on face value, I think you can, if you're taking the low-hanging fruit, as we say, you would say this document shows how new transportation and communication technologies are benefiting or positively affecting African society, because with railroads and telegraph lines being connected to this western coast of Africa, the economy is increasing, and they're facilitating trade. There's more trade happening and more communication. Okay. However, this is one of those ones that you can go both ways. So look at the second paragraph. The abolition of the slave trade, okay, good, and the acquisition of most of the gold-bearing lands in the colony by European entrepreneurs, okay, hone in on that. The acquisition of most of the gold-bearing lands in the colony by European entrepreneurs. How did the European entrepreneurs acquire all these gold-bearing lands? With these technologies. So that would be, they've taken the gold-bearing lands from the African people. Gold makes you rich. Now the Europeans are getting rich off that gold. And they say, this has caused the local people to seek work in timber, rubber collecting, and agriculture, which the government has encouraged. It's like, okay, cool, that's great, but those jobs are really hard. And like hard, they're difficult to do. So this is one where you could say this is a negative, because the Europeans are using this technology to take over valuable lands from the Africans and force them to do other kinds of work. You can go both ways with this one. I think that I've mentioned that a bunch of times, how they throw documents in there that can go both ways. I think this is a classic example of that. All right, document 7. Toyin Falola, Nigerian historian and public intellectual. Memoir about his childhood in the 1950s and 60s, published in 2004. The trains on which I sometimes took joyrides after skipping school were part of the changes that the British had introduced to Nigeria before I was born. By the 1930s, the new railway system had connected Ibadan, my home city, to the rest of the country. Ibadan was the heartland of the cocoa growing belt. Millions of cocoa bags were brought to the city to be carried by train to the port of Lagos for onward transmission to Europe. Ibadan was also in the region producing palm oil and peanuts, which ended up in far-flung places such as New York and London. The trains brought new settlers to Ibadan. They created new neighborhoods defined by ethnicity, race, and education. The old city, whose native residents called each other Mesiogo, had remained intact, but the new immigrants had established their own new city, which had become a fully developed and well-populated and vibrant. The Mesiogo would travel from old to new city to shop, buy goods from the Lebanese, Syrians, and Indians, as well as from the Igbo, Edo, Urhobo, and Ibibio immigrants from other parts of Nigeria who had flocked to the city. The new areas were the first to acquire amenities of electricity and pipe-borne water. I don't know, they do have this classic thing of they literally make document 7, I think, kind of like the hardest. So just looking at that, what is this? What kind of change is this showing? Is it positive or negative? There's definitely a change. What's the change? New trains being used in this part of Nigeria are causing a huge influx of immigrants into the area, not only from other parts of Nigeria, but from other parts of Africa. So, not even just Africa. There are other parts of the world, Lebanon, Syria, and India. So is that a positive or negative? Well, it says it's positive in that people are going to this area to buy things and shop, and it's vibrant there. And then also, this area was the first to have electricity and water, like running water. Okay, cool. But it's also could be perceived as negative because it is disrupting the traditional way of life for these African people that lived in this area previously. Yeah. So I think that's another one that can really go both ways. Now, I just went through all the documents. I promise you, I'm reading these for the first time right now as I'm speaking these words to you. So those are just my initial thoughts. I feel like if you stuck to the strategies that we went over time and time again, that you'd probably be feeling pretty good here. I think these are pretty straightforward when it comes to did these technologies change society or not? And I think there's lots of changes that we see here, positive and negative ones. So think about that. Take a good look at the questions, and hopefully you're feeling pretty good, and we can discuss it a little bit later over the course of this week. All right, have a good one.